There's a certain kind of child you might not notice at first. They don't throw tantrums. They don't demand attention. They don't ask for much. They sit quietly in the corner, or they help without being asked, or they say, "I'm fine," before anyone even thinks to check. And when something hurts them, they tuck it away somewhere deep, where no one else has to deal with it. From the outside, they look easy, mature, low maintenance. But on the inside, something very different is happening. On the inside, they are running a quiet calculation that never stops. Am I taking up too much space? Am I asking for too much? Is my sadness inconvenient? Is my need, any need at all, too heavy for the people around me to carry? And the answer they keep arriving at over and over again without anyone having to say it directly is yes. You are too much. You are the problem. You are the burden. This is where it begins. Not with cruelty, not always with neglect. Sometimes with something far more subtle, a sigh at the wrong moment, a look of exhaustion when you walked into the room, a parent too overwhelmed by their own pain to have room for yours, a home where love existed but emotional space did not, and the child, who cannot yet understand the complexity of adult life, reaches the only conclusion available to them: it must be me. Most people have never heard the term childhood emotional parentification, but they've lived it. It's when a child learns, not from a single lesson, but from thousands of small moments, that their emotional needs are a weight that others struggle to hold, that needing comfort is an imposition, that being sad is selfish, that wanting more than the bare minimum somehow makes you difficult. Psychologists describe this as a disruption in the parent-child dynamic. The child begins to manage their own emotions not because they're ready to, but because they sense that not managing them creates problems for everyone else. They become self-regulating before their nervous system is even developed enough to do it properly. They grow up early, not in the way people celebrate, not the "so mature for their age" that adults say like a compliment, but in the way that costs something, in the way that takes a piece of childhood that never comes back. And what forms in its place is a belief so deep, so quietly embedded in the architecture of who they are, that most of them never question it. The belief that their existence is, at its core, an inconvenience to the people they love. Here's what that belief looks like in a child. They stop asking questions when they're confused because questions feel like demands. They stop crying when they're hurt because tears feel like a performance no one signed up for. They become the helper, the fixer, the one who notices when the mood in the room shifts and adjusts themselves accordingly. They develop a radar, almost instinctive, for other people's emotional states. They can sense frustration before it becomes anger. They can feel the tension in a room before a word is spoken. They learn to read the temperature of the people around them the way a sailor reads the weather, because to miss it could mean causing a storm. And they get very, very good at disappearing. Not physically, emotionally. They learn to take up less space, to shrink their needs, to fold themselves into a shape that feels smaller, quieter, less demanding, to want things privately, silently, and then to let those wants go without ever voicing them. Because voicing them might make someone else uncomfortable, and making someone else uncomfortable is the thing they fear most. Developmental psychologists call this adaptive invisibility. The child doesn't disappear because they want to. They disappear because they've learned that disappearing keeps the peace. But peace bought through self-erasure is not peace. It's just a different kind of pain. Quieter, slower, more patient. Now here's where it gets more complicated. Because this child grows up. They become an adult. They go out into the world, into relationships, into friendships, into careers, and they carry this belief with them like luggage they packed so long ago they've forgotten what's inside. They sit across from a friend who asks, "How are you really?" And they say, "I'm good." Not because they are, but because the truth feels like too much to put on someone else. They are in pain, and they do not call anyone. They are struggling, and they do not ask for help. They are drowning quietly, politely, and they smile while doing it. Because the alternative, being seen, being known, being a weight that someone else has to carry, feels unbearable. They say sorry constantly. For things that don't require an apology, for existing in spaces, for having needs, for being sad in front of someone, for asking for something small. They overgive. Not because they are naturally generous, though many of them are, but because giving feels like the only way to justify their presence. If I am useful, then maybe I am allowed to be here. If I give enough, then maybe the scales balance out. If I take care of everyone else, then maybe no one will notice how much I need taking care of too. This is what psychologists sometimes call earned presence. The belief that you don't get to simply exist, you have to deserve to exist continuously, through service, through sacrifice, through never being inconvenient. And it is exhausting in a way that goes beyond tired. It is the exhaustion of someone who has never, not once, allowed themselves to simply be without justification. But there's something else that happens, something most people never talk about. People who grew up feeling like a burden often become the most perceptive, emotionally intelligent people in any room. Because when you spend your childhood reading the emotional temperature of everyone around you, you develop a sensitivity that most people never have. You notice things, you feel things, you understand almost intuitively when someone is struggling, even when they're smiling, even when they say they're fine. You are the friend people call at 2 a.m. because you pick up. You are the colleague who notices when someone hasn't been themselves lately. You are the partner who remembers the small things, who checks in, who holds space without being asked. You became a student of human emotion, not in a classroom, but in the very specific school of having to survive by understanding others. And that is a real gift, an extraordinary one. But here's the part that breaks your heart. That same sensitivity, the one that makes you so good at seeing others, makes it nearly impossible to let others see you. Because you know too well what it feels like to need something. And you don't want to do that to anyone else. So you remain half visible, present but protected, close but not quite reached. You give everything and receive carefully, guardedly, with one hand always ready to give it back in case it turns out to be too much to ask for. There's a pattern in relationships that people who grew up feeling like a burden often repeat, and it's one of the most painful to recognize. They are drawn to people who need them, not always consciously, but somewhere in their nervous system, the equation is familiar. I am here to help. I am here to give. I am here to make your life easier and your pain smaller. And in exchange, I am allowed to stay. This looks like love. It feels like love. But underneath it is a transaction they learned before they had words for transactions. I will not be a burden to you. I will be useful to you instead. And in that usefulness, I will find something close enough to belonging that I can call it home. The problem is that this kind of relationship, built on the foundation of one person endlessly giving and the other endlessly receiving, doesn't hold. It can't, because it was never built on mutual ground. It was built on the old belief, I have to earn my place here. And when the relationship ends, or when it becomes too unequal to sustain, the person doesn't think this dynamic was unhealthy. They think I wasn't enough, I should have given more, I was still too much of a burden. The belief feeds itself. There is also something that happens in moments of conflict. When someone who grew up feeling like a burden is in a disagreement, they don't fight back the way others do. They collapse inward. They apologize first, even when they are not wrong. They smooth things over before the other person even has time to be upset. Because conflict, to their nervous system, feels like the beginning of rejection. And rejection means one thing: you were too much. You were the burden they finally got tired of carrying. So they become experts at avoiding conflict, at being agreeable, at reading the room and adjusting themselves before the atmosphere can shift against them, at shrinking themselves just enough to keep everyone comfortable. And the people around them often don't even notice, because the person seems fine, calm, easy to be with. What they don't see is the constant, invisible labor of someone managing their own existence so that no one else has to. There is a quiet grief that comes with this psychology. A grief that most people who carry it don't even recognize as grief. It's the grief of all the things you never asked for, the comfort you didn't reach for, the help you didn't accept, the times you were in pain and you managed it alone. Not because you had to, but because asking felt like an imposition. It's the grief of all the versions of yourself that you folded away before anyone could see them. The needy version, the scared version, the version that wanted to be held and didn't know how to say so. It's the grief of all the small moments that accumulated into a belief. The time you cried quietly in your room so no one would hear. The time you said you weren't hungry so there would be enough for everyone else. The time something wonderful happened to you and you didn't tell anyone because you didn't want to make a fuss. The time you needed someone desperately and talked yourself out of asking because you didn't want to be a problem. You didn't lose these parts of yourself in a single moment. You let them go slowly, quietly, one moment at a time. Each time you decided that your needs mattered less than the comfort of someone else. And the strange thing is, the people who created this in you, the parents who were too overwhelmed, the family that couldn't hold your emotions, most of them didn't intend to make you feel like a burden. Many of them loved you. Many of them were simply carrying their own wounds, their own histories, their own unanswered needs. They were not cruel. They were limited. But understanding that doesn't make the belief go away. It just makes it more complicated. There is something that rarely gets talked about in discussions of this psychology. Something that lives not in the mind, but in the body. The belief that you are a burden doesn't stay in your thoughts. It settles into your physical self. It lives in the way you hold your shoulders, slightly raised, slightly braced, as if always ready to make yourself smaller. It lives in the way you breathe, shallowly, carefully, as if even the air you take in needs to be justified. It lives in the tension you carry in your jaw, in your chest, in the space between your shoulder blades. Research in somatic psychology, the study of how emotional experience lives in the body, shows that early emotional patterns don't just shape our thinking, they shape our nervous system. They shape the way our body processes safety and threat. And for someone who learned that needing things was dangerous, the body itself becomes a site of that old learning. That's why rest is so difficult for people who grew up feeling like a burden. The moment they stop being useful, the moment they sit down, slow down, stop doing, the body sends a signal that something is wrong, that they are failing, that they are right now in this stillness, proving the thing they've always feared, that they are not enough. So they keep moving, they keep giving. They stay busy not out of ambition, but out of a deep, unexamined terror of what it means to stop. And the exhaustion that builds from this, the particular exhaustion of someone who never allows themselves to rest without guilt, is one of the most invisible forms of suffering there is. Because from the outside they look productive, they look capable, they look like they have everything handled. What they actually have is a body that has forgotten how to feel safe in stillness. So what happens to the adult who grew up believing they were a burden? They become someone who lives in a perpetual state of apology for their own existence, who measures every interaction by how much they gave versus how much they took, who finds rest difficult and stillness uncomfortable, because in stillness there is no usefulness, and without usefulness, the old question returns. Am I allowed to be here? They develop a specific relationship with vulnerability. They can hold space for other people's vulnerability with extraordinary grace and patience. But their own vulnerability, that gets locked away behind humor or competence or the reflex of, I'm fine. Because vulnerability feels like proof of the thing they've spent their whole life trying to disprove. That they are, after all, too much. Here's what I want you to understand. That is not who you are. That is who you were taught to be. There is a difference between a person who is a burden and a person who is made to feel like one. And that difference is everything. Healing from this belief doesn't happen in a single conversation or a single realization. It happens the way all deep healing happens, slowly, in the small moments, through choices that feel terrifyingly counterintuitive. It happens the first time you say, I'm struggling, and don't immediately follow it with, but I'm fine. It happens the first time you ask for help and sit with the discomfort of receiving it instead of immediately finding a way to give something back. It happens when someone says you can lean on me, and instead of deflecting, you allow yourself, just for a moment, to believe them. These moments feel enormous because they go against everything the nervous system learned. The brain that was trained to believe that needing is dangerous will interpret these moments as threats. It will generate guilt. It will whisper, you're being too much. You're inconveniencing them. You should handle this yourself, but you can learn to hear that voice and not obey it. You can learn to distinguish between the voice of survival and the voice of truth. And the truth, the one that takes time to reach but doesn't leave once it arrives, is this: your needs are not a burden. They are evidence of your humanity. Every person who has ever lived has had needs. Every person who has ever been loved has, at some point, needed more than they could give in return. Needing is not weakness. It is not inconvenience. It is not proof that you take up too much space. It is proof that you are alive. There's one more thing worth saying, something that people who grew up feeling like a burden rarely let themselves consider. The people who love you really love you. The ones who have chosen to be in your life, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care, they do not experience you as a burden. They experience you as someone worth knowing. They notice the way you remember things that matter to them, the way you show up quietly when no one else does, the way you hold their pain with such gentleness, such steadiness, as if you were made for it. And in some ways, you were. They don't keep a ledger. They don't weigh what you take against what you give. They simply want you there, present, real, unfolded. What they want more than anything is the version of you that you keep hidden, the one that needs things, the one that isn't always okay, the one that asks for help and doesn't apologize for it. That version isn't too much. That version is the one worth staying for. If you grew up feeling like a burden, know this: you were not the problem. You were a child in an environment that couldn't hold you fully. And you did what all children do when their environment can't hold them. You adapted. You became smaller. You became useful. You became the one who needed nothing. And that adaptation kept you safe. It helped you survive. It made you who you are. But you don't need it anymore. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to have needs. You are allowed to be tired and struggling and human in front of the people who love you without doing the math on whether it's too much. You are not a burden. You never were. You were just a child who deserved more room than you were given. And it is not too late to give that room to yourself now.